Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for our very first expert-led discussion. I'm delighted to be joined today by Mark Steed, who will be leading today's session on the COVID-19 legacy and the future for international schools. Mark has a wealth of experience as an international school leader and currently holds the position of CEO and principal of Keller International School in Hong Kong. Mark's previous experience includes leading the way as Director of Jess International School in the UAE and chairing the UK Independent Schools Council's Digital Strategy Group. So just before I hand over to Mark to begin today's session, I just wanted to let you know there will be time at the end for some Q&A. We've got a list of questions that were sent through already, and then hopefully if there's some time at the end, we'll be able to address any questions that come up during the presentation. If you would like to ask a question today, please use the Q&A function, and as I said, we'll address this at the end. Over to you, Mark.
Well, it's very good to be with you all today, and we're tackling quite an interesting question. I think it's one that we're all sort of pondering. So here's my sort of predictions a little bit around a number of areas moving forward. So I'm really going to look at an overall sort of issue about whether COVID's actually changed anything or everything, and then really sort of get the crystal ball out in relation to four areas, mainly teaching and learning, assessment, qualifications, continuing professional development, and recruitment. And then really going to sort of draw some conclusions of what school leaders need to be doing in order to sort of cope with that future. So I think we've been on a journey from the physical to the digital for something like sort of 15, 20 years now. We're getting used to it. And, I think rather than just starting with schools, I thought I'd just sort of talk about money, because I think it's a really good case in point. So, we've used physical money, paper money, coin money for, coinage for a very long time. But, and we're on a journey towards contactless. And everything being digital, and so this shift between the traditional of physical cash to the future of digital transactions and contactless payments is one that is a journey that we've been on for quite a time. Banks are phasing out checks. Apple Pay and contactless payments are really becoming more common. So my take on COVID is that it hasn't actually changed the future direction of payments, but it's forced us to move there more quickly. So the point we're actually at the moment, there are some places where actually, when I went back to the UK in the summer, weren't actually accepting cash because they only wanted contactless. So if you like, COVID has become, what is in change management theory, the burning platform, the thing that has made people jump, made people move. And we've seen this in a number of ways. So I think one of the things that COVID's done is it's made us sort of use technology to solve problems. And the particular problems we've got at the moment are around distance and isolation. So if we go back to sort of my model of moving from a traditional physical to a future of digital, COVID is if you like, within that process. And it's been a sort of an accelerator of change. It's been the burning platform. And, we can see this in schools. We've been on a journey from the physical school towards the future digital school for quite a while. And, we've seen bits of it. I'm going to unpack that a little bit more in a minute. We've seen it in terms of teaching and learning. We've seen it in terms of qualification and assessments. We've seen it in terms of professional development. And we've seen it in terms of recruitment. And so what I'm going to do for the lion's share of this is just to unpack some of those ideas around the journey from the physical, from the old normal, towards the future school, the digital, and look at how COVID is sort of impacted on that journey. So first area, teaching and learning and in international schools. So I think, again, the direction of travel hasn't changed, but COVID has made us move more quickly. I think we've been on a journey from sort of face-to-face pedagogies towards blended learning and blended pedagogies for quite a time. So, the whole sort of specialist classroom sort of teacher standing in front of 20 to 30 students, the traditional model has been a journey that is moving towards, that people are questioning that model and have been moving towards a blended learning pedagogy for a number of, for quite a time. And just to unpack what I mean by blended learning, I think it is a combination of bricks and mortar on education when you go to school and online that you do at home. And I think there's a sort of wider context here, that of why people have been questioning the traditional model. There's 263 million children in the world who currently aren't in education. So the current system isn't working for a lot of people. The second factor is that we're heading for an enormous global teacher recruitment crisis. There's a shortage of teachers on the chronic level. 68.8 million more teachers by 2030 is an enormous amount. And if we focus in on the international school community, we're really looking at just over 500,000 English-speaking teachers required, additional teachers required by 2030. That's an enormous number. So when we look at the traditional model, it really is unsustainable. It's failing a lot of children in the world because they're not in school. There's a massive global teacher shortage. And the model of a teacher standing up in front of classes is fundamentally very expensive. It's expensive for governments, and in a lot of the international schools, it's expensive for parents. And so this is why there's been a lot of shift towards the idea that we might move to a blended learning pedagogy, because it solves a lot of these problems. You can reach more students at the same time, it requires fewer teachers, and it allows specialist teachers, physics teachers in the UK. I mean, physics is broadly being taught about half the time by non-specialist physics graduates or non-physics graduates. So there's this scarcity of specialist teachers. And of course, it solves the cost problem. So there's been this movement that was there anyway. So these sort of commercial drivers of return on investment, the economies of scale, scalability, and so on, are all driving us to move away from, or even before COVID, we're moving away from face-to-face pedagogy. But against that, you've got traditionally we've had not a great uptake of blended learning. It's happened a bit in America, and it's happening a little bit around the world in the international school community, where particularly in the fee-paying markets. But the arguments, the pushback comes from education about it's watering it down. Money shouldn't drive education. And it also totally challenges our model of how a teacher behaves and what a teacher does, and the sort of rate that what the teacher's tasks are. We don't want those devalued. What we do is special. These are the arguments that are put forward, and to date that has prevailed as a sort of view. But this doesn't solve the problem for our third world children who are actually sort of living and have no access to education. And this is a picture from the Siddhartha Mitra Hole in the Wall project, which obviously took place in India. So my prediction is that being taught by a specialist teacher is going to become more and more of a luxury. So I think the way that education is moving in the future is really follows what might be seen as a sort of airline model, where you've got different seats on your educational journey. Some of them are premium, some of them mid-range, and some of them are budget. And what determines which class you're in would be how much your class size is, the quality of your teacher, the qualifications of your teacher, the facilities, the amount of contact time. In practice, this isn't going to be a sort of 3 models. It's going to be a whole spectrum of aggregated different models between premium, which will be as we see face-to-face teaching, and in a sort of classroom. So you have budget education will end up being delivered totally through online courses. Mid-range will be delivered by teachers who become real specialists, perhaps even celebrities and so on, through video conferencing, even virtual reality conferencing sort of networks. And then you have premium, which would perhaps be recognizable in its current form. And I think we're moving towards this model. So we then throw COVID into the situation and say, well, what has actually COVID done in relation to teaching and learning? Well, I think what it's done is it's forced us to sort of force people who are skeptical about technology, who didn't want to upskill, it's forced them across the line. And that's on an individual basis, individual teachers, we can probably all think of them, who don't want to embrace technology. They just want to do it the way they've always done it. They're not willing to do it. Well, they weren't until COVID came along, in which case they've been forced to do something different. So this sort of early this adopting curve, the EdTech adoption curve really applies. And I think what we've done is effectively shifted, the majority of people now know how to teach, using, an online platform or using, Zoom or whatever. So, and what's come out of this is that we've developed and moved the whole discussion around live learning and, a long way away. Earlier this evening, I sat in a digital strategy group at school, and we were reflecting on some of the changes. And we were saying, look, if we'd sat here a year ago and said that every teacher is going to teach, live lessons, using, a video conferencing platform, then, we'd have probably said they were mad, and that isn't what education's about. But yet that is the way it is. And COVID, if you like, has forced us to do that. And this is actually changing also the outcomes that we have in education. So, a lot of education might be characterized as being 2D outcomes. Primary schools pride themselves in having fantastic exercise books and fantastic pieces of work that they can put up on displays in the wall. These are sort of 2D outcomes. This is the sign of a good school. When inspectors come around, they want to see good 2D outcomes because that's a sign that there's good teaching and learning. It's a very traditional way of doing it. COVID has forced us to move towards digital outcomes. And, I think, lovely package explain everything, has forced, people to embrace new technologies because those 2D outcomes can't be handed in and marked. There's no exercise books coming in when you're on home learning and so on. So we've moved towards digital outcomes. And, I don't think we should lose the 2D outcomes, but it's really good that we've embraced the digital outcome. So I think, in terms of teaching and learning, COVID hasn't changed the direction. I think we were on a journey anyway, but it has actually forced us to get there a bit more quickly. So one of the questions that's exercising my mind at the moment is, can we do things better post COVID-19? So let's take the scenario where, and this happens every year, isn't it? Somebody breaks their leg skiing or, just can't come into school because they're seriously ill. And at the moment, we're talking in terms of schools having a binary choice. We can either do in-school teaching or we can do home learning, but we can't do both. And I think the challenge I've set my team at school is say, well, look, can we find ways of doing this where we can have normal classroom teaching face-to-face in school, but still flex that into the home learning environment? And I suspect we're going to have to do this because I think we're going to end up with a proportion of our school or, a proportion of our class in quarantine as this whole thing goes forward. At least that's where we've got a plan for. So when I was at Jess, we did a sort of proof of concept of how we might do this using a 3D camera. So we put a 3D camera into a classroom and then we live streamed it to some students in the next room who were wearing video conference headsets. And so powerful was this that they thought they were actually in that lesson, that they put their hands up when they're asked and they were up to answer questions when the teacher did it. So that's one way we might put cameras in the classroom and then live stream to students, whether that's into a VR or a normal environment, matters not. So that's one way we could perhaps move it forward. One other way that we're trialing at school is using Swivel, which is a little device on which you put an iPad. Then the iPad links to a laptop and you run a Zoom lesson. I've put a YouTube clip there, which you might want to follow up on how that works. But the Swivel device follows the teacher around the room, because the teacher is wearing a sensor on their lapel. There's also a microphone. So the teacher can move around the class, teach in a normal way, but actually then can live stream the lesson to the students. Now, there are lots of problems around this, and one of the challenges we have is how do we do that in terms of paperwork? What does all that look like? But I think it's an exciting challenge, and I think it's one that we're sort of really looking forward to getting stuck into at Kellett. So the next area, big area that is the whole area of qualifications and assessment. And again, this is a journey that this isn't new. The exams have been questioned. The structure of our exams has been questioned for a very long time. Sitting in rows in silence, no tech, and also moving the nature of qualifications. Do we want to sit exams, and take GCSEs and A-levels, or do we want to look at a broader model of how it should be, what we might call, a portfolio of micro qualifications? So, and I think this is a journey that is there. So I find this sort of continuing professional development model quite an attractive one. So, a couple of years ago, did a course with the University of Helsinki on the elements of AI. Really interesting course, thoroughly recommend it. 14-hour course. It's got some sort of mini assessments along the way. You can't just sort of fake it. You have to actually get involved in it. And at the end of it, it issues you a certificate and says, do you want to put this onto your LinkedIn profile? And I think that sort of model is quite an interesting one going forward. And I think, when the arguments for why we should lose the traditional exam, are really quite well known. They don't test skills that are really used in the workplace or in society. The key ways it's the only time that young people are ever disconnected. It's when we're at work, we never work without tech, or we work in teams, we collaborate. And I think the other big argument around GCSE is it's no longer a school leaving qualification. And so, where we're headed towards is, where we are really is that qualifications are no longer a proxy for employability. So, the big four have moved away from using qualifications for their recruitment. Burger chains, Spa does, they all do their own assessments. So we have this thing where we have an examination system that doesn't actually, that then everyone ignores, or increasingly is being ignored by employers, who are replacing it with aptitude tests and psychological profiling to recruit for the job. So my son, who did his just left university in the summer, ends up going for a job interview, and they don't actually test anything he learned either at school or at Oxford. They actually test a whole load of things he's just picked up by osmosis along the way on that journey, rather than anything that was overtly taught. And so, and the CBI have been banging on about this forever. This idea that schools need to develop soft skills, critical thinking, creativity, and so on. Again, things that aren't particularly taught in schools. So I think the exam hall is dead. I think it's going to go, and the question is when, rather than and on what timescale. And and with that will go the whole business of league tables, which again is a slightly invidious aspect of education. But I think what we'll see is the idea of micro qualifications coming in. And this is how wider society operates. There's less stress to it, but it's more flexible. It's on demand. You finish the thing. So what I mean is the sort of approach we have to the driving test. We effectively have two modules to the driving test. We have an online theory module and then a practical test. It's a really interesting sort of model for how we do a qualification, a really important qualification. Another model is how we do elites coaching awards. You know, you work your way up. You have a level 1 coach, you become a level 2 coach, a level 3 coach, and so on. And you work your way through over a period of time. There's no reason why we couldn't do this in schools with other things. Another model that works on this is the way we do IT certification, IT qualifications. There are professional pathways through, in this case, the sort of Microsoft suite. Google has a similar one where it actually moves through, and you look at how things work. And so I think when we then come and look at how COVID works, we're actually we end up with a year when there's no exams. People at Oxford are doing open book exams. We're going through all sorts of stuff. We're doing centre assessed grades and everything. The sacred cow was slain for a year. People managed to get through a year, get into universities and so on without actually sitting exams. And the world, the sky didn't fall in. So we know what's happened this summer. We've had no exams. And now the debate begins. Do we need GCSEs? Is where it will start. Do we need an exam at 16 of that nature? And the big debate coming is will exams move online and actually get out the exam hall and start doing other things? And I was involved with AQA 10 years ago, and they produced some fantastic GCSE science, 10 exemplars. Around with animations and testing real science skills, observation, plotting graphs and so on, and they had doing calculations and so on the basis of observation. So the work's been done somewhere around this already. This is nothing new. So I think we at some point need to make the leap from the sort of, the whole gold standard narrative that of GCSEs, A-levels and degrees to a sort of 21st century model of micro qualifications. And frankly, no government has been, wants to be the one who was branded as they were the party or the government that got rid of A-levels or GCSEs. But I think COVID is actually really, the burning platform is going to make people make that leap. And I think we're seeing the early signs of that already happening in Scotland, where their examination system's coming under, it looks like it's going to change radically, and there won't be an exam, at 15, 16. So a very interesting time for assessment and qualifications. And then moving into continuing professional development, again, this again is an area where I think we've been on a journey. We've been on a journey from the face-to-face professional development towards online, on-demand professional development opportunities. So we've got this sort of traditional face-to-face CPD model where you go off and do a course. And this year that's changed. We're doing things like this. We're having webinars. We're having things that are on demand, things that are recorded, they're live and they're also recorded, and we're moving to a different model. But I think we've got to get past the sort of attitude that a lot of people have, which is it's not inset if it's in school or if it's online. It's not inset unless I go off and I'm out of school for a day, or in international context, unless I actually travel to Bangkok and have an overnight there and go on a course there. That sort of approach, I think, will have to change. And what we've seen with COVID is, we can do it. And I think one of the really exciting things about COVID is that it's forced schools to do a lot of peer-to-peer sort of CPD. Some of the best CPD has been in-house from the best practitioners in the school to to other colleagues, and people are good at different things, so they share around what they're doing. But this traditional model, of going out of school, or even bringing trainers into school, there are real costs around the trainers, the time out of school, the travel, the accommodation costs, and so on. and it's fixed times. You have to, it's dependent on time. And to be honest, when most of us go away, the thing we get out of it most isn't the course, the qualification, but the actual time we spend with other people, in the bar, over the coffee, at the breaks, or whatever. And so the new system is going to be about any time, any place, anywhere, and micro qualifications. It's about online networking from a model community. And I think one of the things that COVID has shown is that the digital skills have to be a really important part of that, upskilling. And we've done a lot of work upskilling at school. To put new platforms in place and work on new areas, which is great. So the final area I really want to focus on briefly is the idea of recruitment. And again, we're on a journey here, aren't we, between the old face-to-face recruitment towards an online recruitment model. Again, we've had the interview versus the Zoom interview. The trade fair, the sort of the recruitment fair, in London versus the online recruitment fairs, which we've seen pop up over the past year. And I think TES have just announced in the last few days that the TES fair, which is obviously one of the major events of the international recruitment calendar, is actually shifting online this year. And again, that traditional model is on its way out because it's expensive and it comes at fixed times and so on. And the new model is cheaper. It's more flexible. It's on demand. You can fit an interview in between meetings in school. You can have a schedule that doesn't take you out of school as a school leader at the same time. So it might be that you've got an hour between meetings and you do a couple of interviews during that time, and that works really well. There's no travel costs for you. There's no travel costs for them. And the technology that we've moved to is along these lines. And I think one of the things where people need to upskill is that around the video conferencing interview technique. I spent a big chunk of the last year looking at people's bald patches and up people's noses, and that really shouldn't happen. People need to approach video conference interviews with the same rigor and that they have, and they approach the interviews that they would have face to face. But you haven't got the build up. You haven't got all that drama of travel to the thing, sitting in outside the head teacher's sort of office, and then being asked to come in. You haven't got that nerves thing. You often just move into it from another situation, and that in itself presents challenges. So here's a few tips in the TES article I wrote on it. And again, I think the the international jobs fairs are going to change things. They're very, very efficient in terms of time, and I think they're very efficient for both sides, and they can equally match people up. One of the interesting things about international schools is it's quite common for teachers not to visit the school or even the country before you get recruited to. So, we're halfway there anyway. And then, I think one of the things you can do is, to really build, schools need to build their online brand, because if we're going to be marketing online, we really do need to sort of work on these things, and things like having sections on your website, which show what it's like to be a teacher and what the onboarding process was, and having networks, that are important, online networks. So, things like, the Kellett School current and former pupils group, or being involved in networks, through professional organisations is really, really important. So, I think one of my bits of advice to schools is always to put as much effort into teacher recruitment as you put into pupil recruitment, because that's going to be a real challenge going forward. So finally, just a few thoughts on leaders and how this impacts on leaders. And I often find it useful to think in terms of running a school around the allocation of scarce resources. And our most valuable resource is time. How do we use the time we have with the students. I think one of the things COVID's done is brought home how important contact time is. And I think it's made me rethink a lot about how we do time, how we use time with the students. Can we, at the moment we're back half days in our prep school, but that time is so valuable. So people are revisiting how we use that contact time because it's been taken away from us for so long. How we look at space is really important as well. COVID's made us think about that quite a lot. I mean, I don't think I'm ever going to buy a double desk again because you can't socially distance someone very easily with a double desk. You can put two single desks together, but you can't separate a double desk very easily. And so looking at spaces and having spaces that are flexible, and adaptable to cope with different situations, I think is one of the lessons there. Staffing is very interesting. I'm talking to colleagues in the UK where they're furloughed staff. It's making people think about the staffing levels that they're at. Can the school function with fewer staff? Especially on the sports side, is a question that a lot of schools in the UK are asking at the moment because they're furloughed staff and they've still managed to sort of deliver a level of service. And then finally, where are you spending your cash? So I think one of the ways in this, is the way we do senior team, is in terms of more meetings online. We've actually done, even when we're all in the building now, we're back, back in school, but sometimes it's just quicker for us all to have a Zoom meeting than to actually, schlep around the building. Governors meetings, have been really well attended. If 2 or 3 are traveling, those governors can still attend. So you have a model where people are around the table, but they're also zooming in. And then also parent-teacher meetings as well. I think parent-teacher meetings very effective. A lot more attendance and engagement, particularly about those where they're working. I mean, COVID actually forced us to think about our school day and how we used it because the distance learning, home learning program was so intense. So one of the things we did was we changed all our day around so that the morning became really was the intense part. But then there was a bit of breathing space in the afternoon because, as you're probably finding, if you're trying to do a normal full day, it's absolutely killing. And then, space, this is the sort of some of the social distancing measures we've had to put in place to do lunches, for packed lunches. We usually do packed lunches in the classrooms in our prep school, but they can't do it. They need to have a designated space that is socially distanced, and this is what it is. So I think we need to look at how we put flexible spaces together going forward. I think also, one of the audits that schools will do going forward is, what teachers, what roles need to be done by teachers and what roles need to be done by administrators or can be done by administrators. That's going to be a big debate going forward. That's, I think, on a lot of senior teams' agendas at the moment. And then finally, in terms of cost, this idea of traveling to conduct interviews or do CPD and so on, there's financial costs, there's the social costs of being outside school, the physical costs of wear and tear of traveling back to the UK and running the recruitment round and so on. And then the opportunity cost, what could you have done with that time and all that cost? These are real questions that people are going to revisit in light of COVID. So I think one of the final things is we're going to end up having to live with this for a bit. So I think we need to look in terms of 3 modes of operation. I think we're going to have what I call face-to-face teaching, normal school. We're going to have screen-to-screen teaching when you're at home and all at home, and then you're going to have social distancing, mask-to-mask type teaching. And I think we're going to have toggle between the two. I think this is going to be with us for a while. So I think we need sort of educational continuity plans where we're actually working on this. And that's why I'm particularly interested in this idea of, both and, can we do in school and support at home at the same time? So my one sort of final bit of advice to school leaders is, the future is agile. I mean, you've got to put, you can't have sort of fixed formulaic ways of dealing with things. It has to be agile. It has to be done in a way that is flexible, and and you have to be able to respond at short notice. and that means reflecting on how your senior teams work. That's my thoughts. There you go. That's me. That's how to get hold of me if you want to. And those slides are sitting on my blog site, so you can pick them up there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that, Mark. It's really interesting ideas there and discussion points. And I'm sure everyone in attendance will agree with me that that's really useful for us to kind of consider moving forward. So just moving on to the questions, I'm going to open up the questions that were submitted before the presentation. If anyone does want to add any more, I can see a few popping up in the box. Please do, and hopefully we'll have some time to go through those as well. Okay, so first off, what strategies do you have for blended learning where students are split not only between classrooms but also locations and time zones?
Well, I think this is the challenge at the moment, is that how you do the both and. In terms of time zones, I mean, it depends whether you're doing synchronous or asynchronous learning. I mean, it's a lot easier if you just record stuff, but there's something, you add a lot of value by going live for an element. So I think, coming up with a formula where part of the lesson is live and part of it's recorded and part of it's about set work, I think is probably the easiest landing to get to at the moment. As I say, solutions like, the swivel or using 3D cameras in classrooms is there, and I think some of that work will come, and I think people will find solutions, and we need to mop up and share best practice across the world on what we're doing here, and and I think there will be areas where we can sort of support each other, and we'll work out what the best solution is. There's no doubt that teaching remotely requires a different pedagogy to face-to-face. Sort of the screen-to-screen, mask-to-mask, and face-to-face all require different pedagogies from teachers. It's really difficult teaching mask-to-mask. Very, very difficult, particularly with younger students who find it difficult to sort of project their voices enough in that sort of distanced environment.
Excellent. Do you see an opportunity for blended or remote learning models post-COVID? If so, how would you best prepare for this?
Yeah, I think I've sort of covered a bit of this. I mean, I think we do need to look at it, and I think we'll probably need to out of necessity, over the coming weeks, because I think we're going to probably move between the traffic lights in different modes at different times. But I think the key thing is not losing the upskilling that we've had. So, I mean, one of the things we came back in May and we planned for September to have a home learning day, which seems a bit counterintuitive, because we wanted everyone to know how to do the logins, how the home learning program worked. And it also set a date for us to get everybody inducted by, so that we could actually do it. In practice, we didn't come back at all. So we didn't have our practice home learning day because we were doing it from the get-go. But I think it is something we're going to build into our annual program. And I think it's really important that we share best practice within schools, because we had a group of new teachers join us this year, and we had a lot of the teachers had got themselves to a decent skill level, but people coming in from other schools had different skills, or and so it's about that induction. It's about capturing the knowledge. That's going to be the key. And that's pupil skills and teacher skills, and to some extent parent skills as well, keeping them everyone sharp.
So just a few questions on screen time then. How do you determine how much time online is developmentally appropriate for differing ages?
I I think there's got to be an element of what works. I mean, we've been thrown into this. I mean, it's quite clear that different year groups and age groups can cope with different amounts. Part of the reason we moved to doing mornings only for screen time through the school was that the whole day was too long by a long way for pupils and staff. And that came out of our well-being survey, that people needed that shift. I hope there will be some empirical research comes out of it, but I think where you're losing attention spans, younger children have shorter attention spans on this, on the whole, and I think it slightly depends on the task, but I think it's using the online component, perhaps even the live teaching component, to set up a task and to pick up at the end in a sort of plenary, rather than sort of teaching the whole lesson. So this is what I mean. It's a different pedagogy. So if you're sticking with your normal pedagogy, I think you're going to get yourself in a real mess, because it's too intense and it's too much screen time. So yeah, we're not quite there in terms of actually having empirical research to draw on in terms of how much screen time is good or bad. But I suspect people have had a lot more than in the past 6 months than they really needed.
Absolutely. So how can we minimize screen time with online learning?
Well, again, it comes down to pedagogy, and it's sort of which tasks you're setting. So, and I think it's about this blend between sort of it's not abandoning 2D learning for 3D learning, just because a piece of work needs to be uploaded to a Google site or OneNote or whatever, doesn't mean it can't actually be produced in a sort of non-online way. At Jess, we were totally paperless, and all of our work was held within OneNote at the senior school. But that didn't mean that people didn't sort of do pen and paper work. It just meant that they scanned it or filmed, or photographed it and then uploaded it afterwards. And that, I think, it's thinking out of the box to say, well, just because we're doing online learning doesn't mean that we have to be online for all of it.
Perfect. So what are some of the positives that have emerged from operating under lockdown?
Well, undoubtedly for me, it's the upskilling of the whole community, whether it's the teachers and the students, in terms, I'm a great fan of the role of digital technologies in to enhance teaching and learning. So it's been a really wonderful time to see teachers embrace new technologies or new for the school, not necessarily brand new cutting edge technologies. I mean, we've just introduced Seesaw at school, and that's become a really useful platform for our Key Stage 1. But it's that was a sort of program that we had planned to do, but it sort of got bumped up the priority list in everybody's minds because of the actual COVID situation and teaching from home and having to support home learning. So I think I think that the journey which I've described from the physical to the digital is I think on the whole a good one. I think we need to embrace technologies and use them, not to the limit. There's a balance to be got, but certainly I think schools needed to embrace the digital more than a typical school had, and I think COVID's done that. So I think that would be the major positive. I think the other one is around peer-to-peer training and inset. I think that's really important. Schools have had to look internally to each other for training, and I think that's been a really positive thing, because I think there's a lot of collective wisdom in schools, and it's good to share it.
Fantastic. And in what ways have you noticed the dynamic between staff and parents changed this year, and how do you effectively manage this?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is the relationship between schools and home is always key, and that there's always got to be that sort of triangle of trust between the child, the school, and the parents, and I think that's become sort of even more important this year, because parents, particularly of younger children, have become very much partners in the learning process in a way that they, to a level that they probably weren't before. The level of engagement, and parents have had to be involved to support their child's learning. And I think that that's been very, very positive. I think the other side of it is that, schools are also hubs for community, particularly international schools. We are where people meet people for and make their friends when they first move abroad. You make friends through your children. And I think that bit's been particularly hard, particularly for parents, where the community aspects of schools, the socialization, for children and parents has been missing. And I think that's we'll all look forward to getting back to that a bit more. And it's great to see. We had children in school, we had half the school in today, and we get the whole school back by next week. So it's we're on that process, and there's a buzz because people are getting back together again. We're fundamentally social animals, aren't we?
Absolutely. So just finally then, a couple of questions on focusing around curriculum and obviously the future outlook. What recommendations do you have of how best to deliver curriculum in favour of solid learning?
Well, I think you've got to work out what your core is, and I think in international schools we've got a little bit more flexibility in that. It's not given to us by a national curriculum in quite the same way, or if it is, we can ignore it a bit. So I think some of the things that become important in schools, I think how we use our time is, I think, really important. What we allocate our resources to, in terms of the curriculum. I mean, I do think we're going to head towards an examination system that's probably quite cut down. I think we're, at the end of this, I rather hope that, from a UK perspective, we end up with, science, maths and English as GCSEs, and all the rest are covered by a portfolio of knowledge and experience and work that is captured in some way through a portfolio, a digital portfolio. And I think that we're quite close to being able to make that step at GCSE. And that would be really quite fun. And then, then over a period of time, that will grow through. So I think that will inform how we do things going forward.
Perfect. So what are the new skills that successful leaders need to exhibit in the new global context?
Well, I think it's where it's where I ended really. It was around agility. I think it's about having nimble structures. I mean, whether that's rewriting budgets, or whether it's rewriting curricula, or whether it's rewriting staffing schedules. I mean, there's going to be a lot of change and a lot of movement, and the world's going to go through a period of change and reflection. And I think there's probably a lot. The world that comes out of COVID will not be the same as the one that went into it. It will be, it will probably be some sort of step change, one way or another, coming out of it. And and there'll be people who see that in utopian ways, and there'll be people who see it in dystopian ways. But I think that leaders need to be flexible, and I think what they need more than anything else is a sort of set of core values, educational values, on which they base their decisions and judgments. And that, if you've got that in place, then you can adapt to new scenarios much more easily.
So what advice would you give to middle leaders looking to progress?
Well, I think it is about approaching your career in terms of a partnership with schools. I think there's a two-way relationship in terms of the new sort of contract. People used to have sort of jobs for life. I think the key is, I like working with middle leaders and senior leaders who come in, and we sort of say, right, you'll do 3 years in the role. There's perhaps some end targets to achieve what they're going to try and achieve during that 3 years' time. These are the experiences I can give you as a school leader. I will be able to give you these opportunities. I need you to do, these things for the school, and that might be running projects and so on, and sort of setting up a new process or something. And I think those sorts of things. So to give you an example, because it's probably a bit woolly. We've just set up a sixth form mini MBA program. That's a really exciting project for the teacher who's got overall responsibility for that area. It's great for his professional development, and it's great that he brings a lot of enthusiasm and drive to that role. And so it's a sort of two-way relationship, and I think that's really important.
Brilliant. And finally, quite a broad one, what does the future bring?
Well, I hope the future is a world where we don't have 263 million children who aren't in education. I think we need, and I think one of the reasons why I'm quite committed to educational technology and education is that it allows us to flex good education to more people more quickly and more cheaply. And I think that is a really positive thing, because if we've got an educated world, it's going to be a better place. And so I hope that the crumbs that fall from this particular table will be the crumbs that actually educate Africa and educate the whole of India and so on. That actually we can use technology to make everyone's lives better. And because education is one of those things that is education. We are in the future business. We are growing the next generation. We're educating. We're nurturing the next generation. And I think if we only do that in pockets for elites, and that it doesn't trickle down across the whole of society, and we bring everyone up, then we're failing. So that's what I hope the future will bring.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Mark. We've got a few questions that have come through to the Q&A box. So I just want to go through these quickly. So first off, anonymous attendee says, thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. Do you think screen-to-screen learning or blended learning will be as effective as face-to-face learning?
No, I don't. I think face-to-face learning is unbelievably effective. There's a lot of people don't get it. It's not open to everyone. We haven't got enough teachers. We haven't got global capacity to do it. So people can't, governments, people, individuals can't all afford it. So I think we need to move to a sort of blended model and online model. So I do, my sort of airline analogy, I think we do need to have alternative models. But if all the children who are not in education end up with online learning, that's a better place than where we are at the moment. So I look at it slightly in global terms, but I do think that blended can get you a long way, because I think it develops and fosters skills in young people that where they have a we band around terms like independent learning a lot, but blended, there has to be an element of self-discipline. There has to be an element of independent learning, and I think blended also allows us to have really charismatic teachers teaching more people, and I think there are a lot of teachers out there who aren't great, who don't inspire people, and there are some phenomenal teachers out there who are terribly inspirational, who are perhaps 150 children a week get the benefit of their knowledge and experience. And the question is, can we flex that a little bit further? So yeah, I don't think it's anything like the same standard, but I think it does. I think there's real scope around blended learning, it can really be done.
Excellent. So look, question from Mr. Rickard. I've met some amazing people and made some wonderful contact attending physical networking events. Not attending a physical event will definitely be convenient and definitely save cost, but the missed opportunities will be immeasurable. Have you seen any effective ways of creating opportunities for those little bits of magic which still occur at a virtual event?
Yeah, I don't think it's about events actually. I think somebody asked me this the other day, and they were putting together a conference, and they said, "Well, how do we get the side conversations that you usually have over coffee and stuff?" And I'm not sure it can be done, but I think those conversations and debates do take place on LinkedIn, and they do take place on Twitter. I mean, I find it quite extraordinary that, a lot of people come up to me and sort of say, "Oh, you're independent head," because they sort of only know me through an online environment. And I've made good friends. I've still never met. We have regular conversations and discussions about education, online and through Twitter or through private messages on LinkedIn. And you can share ideas and kick ideas around. I think, and those sorts of forums are really important. And I think setting up those debates. But look, we all get it. The physical bits of being at a conference, or being on a training day and meeting someone else. But it's how you follow up on that. It's you meet someone who's like-minded, and you share that. So we've got a really strong tradition of well-being at Keller's. It's something that we would sort of say that it's one of the things that stands out for us. So if you like, one of our skyscrapers. And a colleague from my former school got in touch and said, "Look, can you connect me?" And I think connecting people, she's got great ideas. There's some fantastic work. So I think it's it's that connections, because it's those conversations that are the important ones. It's what happens after you've been at the conference and then you move something forward that I think is the really important thing, where you share ideas, or you share your schemes of work, or you pick up on a one-to-one webinar or something.
Excellent. I think we're running quite short on time now, but I know there are a couple more questions to be answered. I believe what we'll do now is make a note of these questions, and in the follow-up to following on from this presentation, you'll get an email and a recording, and we'll put the answers in that communication to you. So really, I think what's left to say is thank you so much for your time this morning, Mark. As I said before, really interesting subject material, and I'm sure that everyone in attendance has found it very useful. So thank you very much for that.
Pleasure. Happy to be involved.
Excellent. And thank you to everyone that's tuned in for today's session. And I hope to see you again at the future TTS sessions, which you will get in due course. So thank you very much.